Well, Tim, I'm so excited to be interviewing you today. This is my second ever episode of the Flutist Pioneers Series, and I'm just loving talking to flutists who are creative and put their own spin on things. And I have admired you for a long time. We have so much in common, and I'm always inspired when I see you're this great orchestral player, you are a wonderful soloist, a composer, an author, a teacher. You do so many things. And of course, my favorite is your passion about teaching, practicing. So I just want to kick it off with, if I ask you, how do you feel like you've put your own spin on things in your flute teaching, writing, composing career? What comes to mind? What are you passionate about sharing?
Well, first of all, Terry, congratulations on this wonderful new series of interviews that you are putting together about flutist pioneers. I feel very honored to be included, and that anyone would think of me in that set of people. Um, I the way I put my own spin on things, I think, is by I'm a big believer in reflection, in digging down into who you are and what's important to you, and not just as a part of your personal life, but also in your professional life. And so the teaching practicing project, which comprises the How to Master class and my little book, The Scientific Method of Practicing. All of that grew out of the realization that I had students who seemed to not know how to practice. And then that led to the much more startling realization that I didn't have any well formed ideas about practicing. And once I knew that about myself, it was very immediately clear that that was a hole that I needed to fill. Um, and that I was very interested in filling, and so that began the last 12 years of reading and research and application of ideas grounded in neuroscience and psychology, and then relating those ideas to practice, and and so that really did come from an examination of who I was, what I valued, and in that case, what was I missing? There was a piece I was missing, I felt like, that was keeping me from being the most effective teacher and the most effective player I could be. And I would say the same thing is true for composition. I've in the past, I used to say I write music that I want to play, but it doesn't exist. So if I was looking for a piece to play for a specific concert or an event, and I couldn't find the right fit, I would just write something. And again, that comes from a personal take on having a certain sound in my head, having a kind of piece I was imagining wanting to play, and then not being able to find that piece in our repertoire. And um and and so I would just write it. And luckily now that has sort of transformed. I now mostly write for other people instead of myself. And but even then, the conversations look very similar. When someone commissions me, the conversations around what is interesting to you as the commissioner, what ideas are you bringing to the table, because I very much now look at composition as a collaboration,
Mm-hmm.
which is great because it allows me to connect with another human being and listen to their ideas about what is important to them personally, what's important to them artistically. And then for me, it's like I get to try on every piece is different, every commission is different, because every person who wants a piece is different. So I feel like it allows me to try on different costumes every time I compose a piece. It allows me to find where my identity and my values overlap with somebody else's, and
Oh
then
my
that's the
goodness.
space we can play in. Yeah.
What a beautiful way to look at the art of composing as a collaboration, as a way to unearth the musician's voice, whether it's yours or people you're writing for. As you're talking, I'm struck by this concept that I talk with my students about all the time: giving yourself permission, writing your own permission slips. And you're talking about okay, I have these things in my imagination. I have this sound that I want. I have this voice that I want to put into the world. How did you start giving yourself permission to just run with those ideas?
That's a great question, and this idea of of having students write their own permission slips is so powerful. I think. Just a quick aside before I jump into the actual question.
Sure.
With my students over the past few years, I don't know if you found the same thing, but there was this. I I sense this constant need on their part to apologize, like they miss a note, they're sorry, they forgot to bring a particular piece of music to their lesson. You know, one out of 25 lessons, one time they forget, they're so aghast and they're so sorry. Or you know, they have a new artistic idea and they want to try it out in this phrase and it doesn't go the way they want and they're sorry. And I finally just started answering them with, I'm sorry too, what are we sorry about? And to get to have that conversation of the importance of giving yourself permission, because one of the truths of life, I think, is that at some point we all have to realize that we're the ones in the driver's seat.
Yes.
And so, you know, whatever it is that you're doing in your life, you're the one who's doing it and you are in charge. At the end of the day, you have to call the shots. I think that's true for every one of us. So I'm sorry, what was the specific question again?
Oh, that's okay.
Just
Yeah, I'll bring it up again, but I just have to say, I love that you address with your students. You know, there's no need to feel sorry about anything because we're all making choices and designing our creative and artistic lives one step at a time
yes.
together and for ourselves. I have a not so elegant way of bringing this up with my students, especially with my female students. I ask them, you know, have you ever said, I just have to run to the restroom real quick? I just got to go real quick. You know, why is it quick? I'm gonna go to the restroom. I'll be
Right.
back. Right? And then, you know, as
Yes.
flutists, you know, before you play, it is not only okay for you to take your time, it is your right and your responsibility to take your time and to take up space. So I love that you address this issue of apologizing just for being and trying things. That no, we have to just be who we are and experiment
Yes.
along the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, gosh, and I got kind of enamored with the permission slip thing too. What were we talking about? I think it'll pop back up here in a second. I'll kick us off on a different foot, and then if
Okay.
you
All
remember,
right.
bring us back in.
And I would do a better job
No,
now.
no,
Yeah.
I love tangents and rabbit holes and things like that. You know, I was exploring your website before we started this interview, and by the way, love your website. Another way you're
Thank you.
inspiring me because I love how well put together it is and how all your creative projects are easily accessible for everybody. I'm a sucker for stories. I love stories, and when I saw that little book of narratudes, oh, Tim, that looks so cool. How did that come about?
That came about, it was, I was really fortunate to do my doctoral studies at UT Austin. Um, Not only because of the fabulous, inimitable, transformative Marianne Gadigian, but also because many of her colleagues were really wonderful mentors to me as well. And so that was an assignment it began, the narratives began as an assignment I was given for my specialized comprehensive exams in my doctorate, where in this case it was our clarinet professor at the time gave me, he had a discussion with me about what I might want to do for the exam. And I said, you know, I have this idea about writing etudes for young players that bridge the gap between technique and expression, because
Mm,
I think one reason why some young players start play, you know, they come to the instrument all gung-ho with all kinds of energy and excitement, imagination, and then they fizzle after a little while. I think part of that is because so much of beginning flutist pedagogy is technique heavy, and for good reason. I mean, and when I say technique, I mean the technique of producing the sound, the technique of, the actual finger technique, the technique meaning literally anything you do physically while you're playing the instrument. That will affect what's coming out of the instrument, and of course these are it's very, very important for beginners to get them started with good solid habits, as few bad habits as possible, so that they have less that will impede them down the road. And so, there are very good reasons why we emphasize the physicality and the technique of playing in the very beginning, but that also doesn't tap into into what young people, is one of their greatest strengths, which is imagination.
Yes.
And so, I feel while we're addressing a student's weaknesses, we also have to be tapping into their strengths. And so I wrote the narratives as a way to bridge technique and expression. And what the book is it is a set of, I wrote it long enough ago now that I'm having to think off the top of my head. I'm not sure I'll get it right, but I think it's a set of 30 it's a theme and 29 or 30 variations on three blind mice. I wanted to pick a tune that kids would know, in this country at least, and also a tune that told a story that I could then take the story and run with it. And so what happens is every variation is a little bit more of the story of these three mice, and every variation sees them interacting with people, with other animals on this adventure that they're having, and every part of the story has a different emotional tone. And so, because of that, for example, as the story evolves, it'll the variations will change keys. Some are in major, some are in minor. Of course, the articulation changes to reflect the character. The choice of which octave to write in is reflective of the character. And all of these things are technical aspects of playing. For example, being able to quickly and smoothly and well switch octaves. That's a technical aspect of playing. But the octave you write in can reflect something about the character of the music. And so, and that's what I've tried to do in the etude, because each part of the story comes also with a set of questions for the student,
Oh, that's
designed,
fantastic.
yeah, and it's designed to get the student to understand that, playing a minor scale is a technical ability, but we use minor keys to get these emotional responses out of people. And it does that the whole way through. It makes explicit, or actually it asks the student to make explicit, what is the connection between this articulation and this emotion or this character, between this key and this emotion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in that way, the student is building technique, but at the same time, every step of the way being asked to use their imagination, being asked to dig down and connect these dots in a way that I didn't feel like any other pedagogical material we have out there does.
Yes, you're saying some of my favorite words: connection, imagination. What a really inventive and helpful project. Something that I share with my students often is when I was younger and learning to play flute and learning a method of preparing music, I thought, okay, correct notes, correct rhythms, good sound, blah, blah, blah. And then you add a story to make it interesting.
Right, right.
Right? And now, of course, as you know too, the story is the whole point. All of
Yes,
the technical things are to bring the story to life, the song,
yes.
dance, the story. I cannot wait to get my hands on that book and go through it myself. That's such a fun project. And I do
Yeah,
remember our question. I
yeah.
was just asking you how you started giving yourself permission
Hmm.
slips to write your pieces and to start doing all of these things.
Yeah, it's so funny being a teacher for so long. I automatically start jumping to how I help other people do this stuff now. But that's a very important question, I think. Um, it, I mean, I remember being an adolescent. I was 11 when I started playing the flute. I really, really wanted to play something. It was originally the clarinet. My mother had promised me piano lessons, but we hadn't quite been able to make it happen yet. So then when I was eligible for band in the coming up on the 6th grade, I wanted to play the clarinet, ended up picking the flute. And then from that moment on, my life was just filled with music to the point where I was, a 12, 13, 14-year-old walking around and just melodies would pop into my head that were my own melodies. And I didn't really know how I was doing it. It didn't even occur to me that that it was strange, but it was just, there's, for some reason, I've walked around for the last 25 years with my own music ticking along in my head. And so that, the logical next step was to start writing it down, which I started doing when pretty late in high school. I had I don't even remember what it was called, but a very rudimentary notation software, not Finale or Sibelius, but it was sort of an early attempt at the software that's like those things. And although Finale did exist by then. And I started writing these pieces that are now unfortunately forever lost. It's a long story, but a lot of my things from the first half of my life, whether they are musical possessions or creations or toys I had growing up, they were lost. So they are now they're sitting in some dumpster somewhere, hopefully biodegrading to make the earth a better place.
They live only in your memories, huh?
That's right. But that's the important place where they live. And so I remember this music, and some of it was just wildly unplayable. And it was just, hilarious to listen to it playing back over the MIDI, through the MIDI in the software. But it was this kind of thing where I would just play it off. I would play the MIDI version off the computer for my friends. And it was just one of these things where it was a point in my life where, academically speaking, it was very important that I continue to try to get a handle on how to play the flute late high school, early college. And so this was really like a creative release for me. This was fun time with music, whereas at that point in my life, I looked at practicing as work time with music, and this was fun time. And so it was, because it wasn't formal. And actually, this is what I find really interesting. I specifically didn't look at myself, and I'm using all these air quotes right now, but I didn't look at myself as a real composer. And because I did that, that actually was my permission slip. I'm not a real composer, so I can do what I want, and I don't, I can just try to write down the music I hear in my head, and I don't have to, my degree program isn't composition. I am not, I'm a performer. That was how I identified. I'm a performer at that time. And because of that, I can do whatever I want. The sky's the limit, because I don't have any rules. I don't have someone looking over my shoulder telling me what to write. And I think over time, that attitude, the sort of protection I gathered from not being a real composer, that attitude combined with an understanding of music that over the course of my education became more and more sophisticated. And I think it was the marriage of those two elements. Plus, I will say, in my undergrad, wind players were required to take orchestration. Mm-hmm. And I also opted to take counterpoint. And in my opinion now, as someone who very much believes I am a composer, who knows what the word real means? I am definitely a composer. Those two things, orchestration, counterpoint, are, if you have a really solid understanding of those two things and harmony and form, you can compose. And actually, what I think I proved, because I started composing before I had a good understanding of all that stuff, is you can start earlier than that too. But as you're growing, these are the basic tools. maybe this is one of my hot takes that I feel like I'm becoming famous for, but you don't really need a lesson to compose. You could actually just sit down and start writing, or you can, or what I always found to be really helpful for myself was I would improvise when I was starting a piece to try and find the harmonic language and the sound world I wanted to use. And so I think it was those three threads came together. The very good training I had in the areas that were necessary to develop as a composer, the willingness to start composing because I wasn't real, and this just sort of general, more sophisticated understanding I had of music that developed as I progressed through my different degrees.
That makes so much sense. And it resonates with me a lot, in addition to encouraging me, because I definitely, even though I've built my confidence in many areas, I feel like I'm a baby composer. So it's good for me to hear all of these things. But after I read The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron many years ago, I went through a painting phase. And since I had no training, no lessons, no technique, nothing, I felt free. I felt like, oh, I can just do whatever I want. And then I just started creating, and it went really well, and it lit me up, lit up my imagination. I ended up selling a couple of paintings, and somehow during that phase, which, I mean, I should get back to it. We should do the things that light us up, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
Somehow during that phase, it started to make sense to me. Okay, there's a blank canvas, there's nothing. And now my imagination made something, going from nothing to something.
Yeah.
And it just sounds like you had that connection and appreciation, for how that works, and almost it's like a need. Right? It was like almost like a compulsion or a need to express
Yes.
yourself and to turn your ideas and those melodies in your head into something real and tangible in the world. I mean, that's just such a beautiful thing. Um, if you don't mind speaking a little bit more to what you mentioned, with your flute playing, and because obviously now you're so into practicing and teaching it, but feeling like, but I think you call it. I've read somewhere in one of your articles, you call them the music police. Like feeling
Yeah.
like somebody's looking over your shoulder.
Yeah.
I totally get that, and I think that a lot of flutists feel that way. Do you
Mhm.
mind speaking a little bit more on that topic?
I'm absolutely happy to. It is, it's so interesting when we talk about this dichotomy between things we're trained to do and things we're not trained to do, and how you have felt the same. Um, it's actually like it's a blessing when we engage in things that light us up, but we're not, we don't have any formal training in those areas. And then you realize, oh, that means I'm completely free. And the I think one of the great secrets of life is that we can access that freedom a lot more often than we think we can. And even in things that in which you are highly trained, or in which you are becoming highly trained, so we're talking about young musicians or flutists who are developing in their educations. Um, it is, hold on a second, let me gather my thoughts for a second, because I have a lot of thoughts about this. um,
We're so similar. Sometimes I just freeze mid conversation because I have
yeah.
so many ideas I'm excited about. It's almost impossible to choose the first one. Um,
Right.
yeah, but on the,
um,
the music police, I can't wait to hear your
yeah, yeah,
thoughts.
yeah. So I feel like, um, especially for flutists, who I find to be, and this is to anybody who's listening to this interview, this is a gross generalization. This is, of course, not true for everybody, but I do find that so many flutists are very, what we, 10 or 20 years ago might have called very type A personalities. My
And
joke is that we're type A because we like getting A's. And that sort of seems to be a widespread mindset in our community. And it comes from a desire to do your best, which is good and pure and wholesome and admirable. But what sometimes happens, I find, is that the desire to do our best can turn into perfectionism at some point. And that's when, so when I talk about, the music police or the practice police, that is a form of what I think of as unhealthy guilt. And, because we are sort of pulling a guilt trip on ourselves to play better, but it's always about it when you feel oppressed by those thoughts. It's always about playing better to win something, or playing better to please somebody else, or playing better not for you. We frequently don't frame it when we're feeling oppressed by those thoughts. We don't frame it as, I'm trying to advance myself, period. I'm just trying to take a step. I'm just trying to progress. And instead we get into this, we get into this zone where, the things we tell ourselves are, that's not good enough, or that note is still sharp, or you fixed this problem, but now you're cracking that note. And it just becomes overwhelmingly negative. And that's the music police banging on your practice room door saying, you need to be better. And instead of, so many things in life can be drastically altered simply by changing your perspective. And so I think if the people who feel beaten down by their own music making because they feel bad that they are not living in the moment, they can't play where they know their potential is, where they desire to be able to play, instead of looking at it like that, I think it's more helpful to turn it around and look at it from a standpoint of, anything that we're learning to do, any kind of growth that we're having, we have to take it one step at a time. That is the shortcut is one step at a time. And if we think about music like that, and we think about progressing like that, then every time we take a step, for whatever that step is, anytime we are able to reach out of our abilities and do something that we've never been able to do before, no matter how tiny we think that thing is, that's celebration time, because you took a step. And I think framing it that way, like, how can I take the next step, rather than how can I stop being so terrible, which is what a lot of students think in there. I know they think it because they say it to me, things along those lines. I know they think it because I have thought it a million times and had to learn how to reorient my thinking. And I still have to do it because I'm a human and I am not perfect. And so sometimes I'll slip into that pattern of thinking and I'll have to reorient myself. But that's what I would say to young people who are really struggling with this, and who feel like they have the music police on their back. Is like, remember, you're in charge. You are, there is no music police, there's you. And because you're in charge, you can decide how you're going to orient yourself to your practice and how you're going to think about it. And this really comes heavily from a great book called Flow, which I mentioned in my practicing book, by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And he really goes all in that book, advocating for our power to change the way we focus our attention. And one of his arguments in the book, and it's, in my opinion, it's a little bit of a slippery slope argument, even though I think it's true. We do have the power to train our attention where we want it. That doesn't mean a very young person, like a teenager, can suddenly switch gears and move their total attention from point A to point B without any lapses. That's not what it means. But it means we have the ability to learn to do that better and better and better. And the reason I think that's a slippery slope is because, in the book, he makes this argument that people who are happy are the ones who tend to be the ones who are the best at training their attention purposefully where they want it. And the book is probably 30 years old now, and times a lot has changed in the last 30 years. And so I do think that it's important to be open to all emotions and all experiences, and not just sort of relentlessly pursue wanting to be happy all the time. there are things in life that are sad, and they're just sad, and there, there is grief, there is disaster, there is loss. And my personal philosophy is that it's not healthy to try and slap a happy face on those things. I think it's good to authentically feel whatever you're
Well,
feeling.
yeah, and as musicians, we have to be intimately familiar with the range of human emotions.
Absolutely, because how I feel like there's probably more music about sadness than there is about happiness. Yeah, absolutely right. And but I mean, at least the positive takeaway from this idea that we as humans can learn to train our attention in ways that benefit us, that is, I think that's the fundamental idea behind how to escape the practice police. And sometimes the real hurdle then is just convincing ourselves that we have that power, and convincing our students and our colleagues that they have that power, um,
Yeah.
that to be exercised with discretion, of course.
Right. Right. I love that you're inspired by things that you read. I noticed on your website that the book Bounce was quite a jumping off point, a bouncing off point for you with your with your teaching. That's something I'm very passionate about myself. I take my studio at UTA through a different book every semester so that we're developing a shared vocabulary. Do you want to talk
Mhm.
a little bit about Bounce and how that changed things for you?
Absolutely. Bounce was sort of the book that started the whole journey into how to practice. And I wish I could remember how I found out about it. I don't even remember. What I do remember is that, and this is where I get to give a little shout out to public libraries, one of the great loves of my life. I lived a short walk away from one of the LA public libraries at the time. And that's how I got a hold of the book. I didn't buy it off Amazon like we all do everything nowadays. I walked to the library and checked it out and read it. And it was revolutionary, because the whole thesis of the book is that, and it builds, and in a way, and in this way, it kind of builds off the talent code, which it references a lot, Daniel Coyle's book, The Talent Code. So Bounce, by the way, by Matthew Syed, who was one of the world's top table tennis player. The whole central point of the book is that excellence is learned. And while there is no step 1 through 1 billion for how you individual person can achieve excellence, there are principles of learning that help with building excellence. And I read that at a time in my life when not only was I very interested in teaching my students how to practice and teaching myself how to practice, but I was hitting a wall in my playing that I couldn't figure out how to get over. And just sort of technique in terms of technique, in terms of sound, in terms of intonation, like I could hear flaws in my playing that I couldn't figure out how to correct. And I tried and tried and tried for 2 years before I went off to get my doctorate, and Marianne was able to help me take everything apart and put it back together again. But the Bounce was instrumental in that it gave me the hope that it was possible to overcome this wall. Because before I read Bounce, I thought, maybe this is just as good as I get. Maybe this is my ceiling, and I guess everybody has a different ceiling, and this is just, I'm not going to grow and evolve anymore. This is it. And Bounce emphatically pushed back against that idea. And it didn't just do it sort of hypothetically. It did it with data. It did it with real world example after real world example after real world example of people who have become experts, world-class experts at things, having come from being born with no knowledge of those things. And so, that was one of the most important things that book did for me, was it gave me the hope that, oh, wait a minute, maybe this wall that I thought I couldn't climb, the ceiling I thought I couldn't break, maybe I can overcome it. And that led to lots of other different books which helped. And it's funny how that work ended up overlapping with my doctoral work in a really meaningful way, because that was That was the 3 years I set aside to just put my, sort of put my head down and go inward and solve the problems that I felt I was having in my playing. And I look back and think it's just really serendipitous that happened at the same time I was also doing all this research into how to solve problems in your playing. And the way that all came together for me was just, it really was kismet.
I think it's amazing how everything is related. I remember one of the things I learned during my doctoral studies was, as I walked from class to class, especially I remember my first semester, Tuesday, Thursdays, I had 20th century history for an hour and a half. And then I walked across the hallway to do medieval Renaissance. And it started dawning on me how related everything was. And then, the more I practice and perform and teach and do all these things, life doesn't have subjects like school has subjects.
Right.
It's not all divided. So I would love to pose the question to you, kind of considering how serendipitous all of those things were in your life and just this idea that everything's related. How have you seen parallels in your creativity and personal expression kind of mirror or coincide with your development as a flutist, as a performer? Have you seen any connections that are interesting to you?
Yes. I think of, I do want to clarify, I speak glowingly of my time during my doctorate. That is not an endorsement or an encouragement of every musician to get a doctorate. It's just something I decided to do, and it was really beneficial to me. So, I would say that the period over the last 10 years, which began with my doctorate, I started it 10 years ago, has been this has been the period in which I've experienced the most growth ever. And I think a lot of that is because, again, not only because of my flute lessons at UT, but another one of my really wonderful mentors in Austin was a man by the name of Robert Hatton, and he is one of their professors of theory. And our relationship began when I got to UT. There was only one required doctoral course in theory. It was called Analytical Techniques. But there were two sections of it, and I inquired about what the difference between the two sections were. And one was for composers and one was for performers. And so I immediately said, well, I want to take the one for composers. And because, there is this goes back, I think this is why, just to speak a little bit to our earlier discussion, I think one of the reasons why a lot of performers don't feel comfortable composing is because academia does what life doesn't. It divides life into sections, and you fit into the performer section, right, and not the composer section. And so, being who I am, I immediately sensed that there was something I could gain from the composer section that I might not get out of the performer section. And so that began my relationship with Robert Hatton, who is just brilliant. And all of his research is into what we might call written expression, how the notes a composer chooses actually have coded expressive meaning and have come to have meaning over the years. And so, the expression isn't confined to the way a player phrases it or the way they use their vibrato or the way they use their dynamics. There is actually even expression in the very notes a composer chooses, because different collections of pitches have come to mean certain things over millennia of human music making. And so studying with him, it opened up whole new ways of thinking about music for me. And what I saw happen after that was it opened up lots of different sounds in my compositions. And, it encouraged me to really think about the structure of a piece before I start to write it. When I used to write, I used to start at the beginning and I would finish at the end, and I might not know what was going to come out until the very end. But, the more different ways I learned to think about music, and especially thinking of it as a collection of emotional expressions, that really changed the process of writing for me. It changed, like I said, I started being much more willing to sketch out a piece before I started writing it, mostly because in the beginning I think I didn't know how to sketch out a piece, and so I would just start writing, and then editing was my way of was my way of sort of making a piece cohesive. It would have a lot of stuff in it, and then I'd have to take a lot out to make it cohesive. But learning to look at music as a narrative, because there's so much evidence, researched evidence, that even people who say that their music is absolute, there is narrative there. Even the composers who don't want to admit it. And that brought me to a point where, in addition to changing the compositional process for me, it really brought me to the point where I'm at now, which is I started looking at myself not as a musician, but as a storyteller. And sometimes I will tell that story with just the flute. Sometimes I will use words or images or poetry. But it's all, everything I do now is artistically is in the service of telling stories that I hope are able to connect with anybody who's listening, stories that I hope illuminate something about what it is to be human. And so that is, I feel like there, especially when you look at academia and you look at composition in academia, it's looking back about 70 years ago to the middle of the 20th century, and especially in America, you had a style of composition that was very academic, very much about, total serialism, and that changed over the last half of the 20th century. But there is sort of this idea in academia that your music has to be rigorous. And it's funny, it was in academia and through all of this research and exposition to all these different ideas that I realized that that is a way of looking at music, but doesn't have to be my way. And so it really freed me to tell stories, whether I'm playing somebody else's music or writing my own.
I'm inspired, and I feel really, really connected to what you're saying. Storytelling it's magical, and it can draw in the listener and also help you as a performer connect in ways that simply going for accuracy and impressiveness will never ever get you there. And I'm sort of kind of want to play around with the word storytelling for a moment, because you've run the gamut, talking about giving yourself permission to be creative in your compositions, to practice in ways that are meaningful to you, to tell stories through music, whether you're performing or composing. I wonder if you were to talk to, say, a young college flutist setting out on their career and looking at the story of their music career and how they're in the beginning stages of it, what would you tell them about telling the story that they want to tell?
I would say that they're in the driver's seat. You're holding the pen. You are already writing your story. And, the funny thing about writing our own stories in life is that life will intercede at some point. Other people's stories will bump into ours. Sometimes they will complement our stories beautifully, and sometimes somebody else's story will alter your story in a way that you can't predict. But at every step along the way in that journey, anytime your story takes an unexpected turn that you didn't plan, what you do get is to decide how you will respond. You do get to write the next part, even when someone else has forced your story off the track. You do, that's the gift of that, is that you get to turn around then. And even if it's a terrible running off the tracks, even if your life ends up being what, we love to talk about our lives with all these colorful words, like my life's a disaster, my life's a train wreck. Even if that's true, you then get to write the chapter after the train wreck. So Yeah, I mean, that is how I would frame it for young students.
Yeah,
And
when you lose the
yeah.
audition, or you don't achieve what you set out to achieve, or you have a,
Mhm.
I'll do air quotes now, bad lesson, right?
Yeah, right. Right.
Or yeah, or you have some kind of just devastating emotional experience where you wanted something so badly on your musical path, but it
Mhm.
didn't turn out the way you wanted. Great, fantastic. This is the
Yeah.
starting point of the next part of the story.
That's right. And I mean, something that's important to remember, certainly has been part of my story, and I share it with students, and they incorporate it into their stories or not, as they will, is that I really legitimately wish that I had kept all of my rejection letters from the very beginning of my time playing the flute, and all of my, yes, congratulations, acceptance, celebratory letters. I wish I'd kept those two different sets of letters, because what students don't understand is that, in a musical career, you are almost guaranteed to get a number of rejection letters that exponentially outnumber, the yes letters. And the flip side of that is you don't need a lot of yes letters. You just, sometimes one yes will change your life. And that's important to think about, because if you're someone who is persisting on this path and you've made it through a million no's, and one yes changes your life, what does that mean? That means that it means so many things. One of the things it means is that yes is more powerful than no, because one yes can outweigh a million no's. And it also means that, it goes back to, again, we have the power to put our attention where we want it. And so after a no, after a failure, a rejection, we can respond. We can decide to respond in a way that says, all right, how did this undesired outcome come about? And what steps can I take to try and ensure a better outcome next time? And then you start looking at each, and let's say we're talking about auditions or competitions. You didn't make it into the live round for this competition, so you want to try again for competition X, so you want to try again for competition Y. Great. You examine the process of competition X and try to get feedback from the judges, and doing that, you try to build a presentation for competition Y that starts to remedy some of the issues you had in X. And then you go for it. Then Y becomes an experiment. You go for it. Afterward, there will be an outcome. Then you unpack again. You analyze what you did that resulted in that outcome, and you decide what needs continued refinement. And so, in that way, I tend to look at life as a series of experiments. And I'm always trying to tweak something to see if I can get a better outcome next time. And sometimes I don't get that better outcome next time after I've tweaked something. And then I go, okay, well, I guess I'll keep tweaking until I get it. But it really just becomes, it's just a series of experiments. It is not, one of the beautiful things about playing music is that when we make a mistake, nobody dies. So, that's why I tell people I could never be a surgeon. The pressure is too high. But musician, I can do that. That I can handle.
Yeah. Oh,
So
I can't wait to share this interview with everybody. I mean, between looking at your musical path as a series of experiments and the power of writing your own story, basically the theme is you are completely empowered. No matter where your flute playing is right now, no matter where your academic or musicianship skills are right now, no matter how old you are, yeah, you can do anything you want to do one step at a time,
that's
and
right.
giving yourself permission to do what it is that's calling you to be done.
Yeah. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about being human, is that you can always take one more step. As
Hmm.
long as you're alive, you can take one more step.
Yes. Oh, Tim, this has been fantastic. And
Well,
I'm going to
thank you.
put links below this video to, first of all, probably narratives, because I'm so excited to go look at your project.
Thank you.
But to the music that you've written, I've had so much fun listening to Blowout and Pop, and just so many cool pieces. And you've got so many great performances on YouTube and things. So I'll be sure and put a lot of links below. Thanks for
Thank
taking the
you.
time out of your
Of
day to talk
course.
with me.
Yeah, this was so fun. Thank you for wanting to talk to me. I
Sure.
tell people I'm about to be 40 this year, but I'm still the same person who would come home from kindergarten with progress report week after week that said talks too much. So I'm always happy to talk.
Right. We'll have to do this again. And Tim, the similarities just keep adding up. I'm about to turn 42. I mean, not 42, 40 also.
Oh yeah.
In May. When is your birthday?
November.
Oh, November. Oh, okay. I'll get there first. I'll tell
We're
you how
s-
it
we're
goes.
we're 6 months. Yeah, let me know. Let me know so I can turn the car around. But we're 6 month opposites. Like we're May November. Oh, how cool is that?
Yeah, we'll
Love
have to do
that.
this again because I'm sure we have plenty more to talk about.
I'm sure.
Yes.
Thank you,
Well,
Terry.
have a great day, Tim.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.